Hello and welcome to Shift from Burley Wharfdale Methodist Church. You may or may not have heard of the lady that Pam is going to tell us about today, but I can guarantee that you will recognise what she did in the medical profession. She changed our perspective on an aspect of care which can now be seen not only in the UK but across many other countries worldwide. Let's hear from Pam as she chats with Caryn about an extraordinary lady inspiring an ordinary person like Pam to follow the path she did.
Good morning everyone, my name's Caryn. Welcome to the Shift service this morning. Today we're joined by Pam Stoney, who's not only a member of our community and has been in the medical practice for over 30 years, but Pam's also been very integrally involved in hospice, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today. Morning Pam.
Thank you. Morning Caryn.
Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, I know that you wanted to talk specifically about someone that's really been an inspiration to you, so maybe
Yes.
Let's start there and talk about Cicely Saunders. Who was she?
Right. Well, Cicely Saunders was someone without whose vision, faith and determination, a large part of my working life would not quite have had the focus it did. For it was Cicely who had the vision of St Christopher's Hospice, the first modern hospice. Out of those new hospices, the specialty of palliative medicine was created.
What is palliative medicine?
Palliative medicine is the medical specialty which looks after people who have a life-limiting illness, whether that's cancer, cardiac failure, renal problems, or neurological problems like motor neuron disease or Parkinson's disease.
Okay. And Cicely Saunders was around a long time ago.
Yes, she was actually born in 1918, just at the end of the First World War, born into a comfortable life, and decided to go to Oxford in 1938 to study PPE, with the intention of becoming a political secretary.
Oh wow, that's quite different from what she ended up doing.
Absolutely. As the Second World War started, she had this call to be a nurse, and so after a year and a term at Oxford University, decided to leave to become a nurse and went to start nurse training. While she was waiting to start nurse training, she was a volunteer ambulance driver, and her interest in faith matters was starting to grow, and she was reading various books. She trained at St Thomas's and was there for about 3 years. Part of it was in outside of London because the hospital had to move because of the Blitz, and but she was plagued by back injury, and sadly at the completion of training was told that she wasn't well enough to actually work as a nurse.
Oh wow, after all that time studying.
Oh yes, absolutely. So somebody encouraged her to go and become a lady almoner, a bit like a social worker. So she went back to Oxford for another term or two, and while she was there studying for the sort of social work degree, equivalent of a social work degree, while she was training as a nurse, she could see there was a huge unmet need in those patients who had cancer and the issues of pain and distress and were feeling, and she felt they would needed better attention. But when she was told that she couldn't become a nurse, she went off to train to be a social worker so that she could provide support for those individuals and work in the hospital. While she was working as a social worker, she also volunteered as a nurse in a home for the dying run by nuns called St Joseph's.
That's quite inspirational in itself.
Absolutely. When she was in Oxford, that second time, she was exploring her faith more and went to a Socratic club which was run by C.S. Lewis, the famous writer who wrote the Tales of Narnia. Once she was working back at St Thomas's, she impressed the surgeons so much as in her medical social work degree, and the care she was giving to patients and her understanding of their problems, that he said to her, the best way you can have of improving care is to train to be a doctor, because it's the doctors that abandon the dying, not the nurses.
It's quite something in those days.
Absolutely. We're talking about the 1948, 1949, around about then.
Male-dominated industry, not a lot of female doctors.
Yeah. So in 1951, she's there, back at Oxford again.
At this stage, she's in her 30s?
Yes, she's in her 30s, trained, and she finally graduated in 1957. Wow. So while she's going through medical school, she's also still volunteering in the home for dying.
Yes.
So developing her understanding, seeing how the nurses are providing care, and she's developing her vision for how care should be delivered.
So what happened after? She then graduated as a doctor.
Well, in the last year, she produced a paper, and this first publication on about the care of the dying was a very mature one. And in fact, I just want to quote from this book, which is a biography of her. Decades later, Cicely could still give a religious rationale for her first publication. When asked how such a mature work, looking after the care of the dying, could have emerged, fully formed in the earliest stages of her career in medicine, she found her response in the divine. I mean, God wanted me to do it. So you know, as thy day is, so shall thy strength be. He doesn't give you the opportunities for you to take without giving you some of the capacity to deal with them.
Wow, that's really making sure she's in the right place, doing what she's meant to be doing.
Absolutely.
And giving back the way she's meant to be.
Yeah, it is incredible. So those three different roles as nurse, social worker and doctor were ideal for addressing the care of the dying. So Cicely developed the concept of total pain, which meant that pain does not have just a physical dimension in terms of the pain that's actually caused by the disease, but also an emotional, psychological, spiritual and a social one. So it's about the person's place in society and about the distress they're feeling as a, whole person.
It must have been something quite novel in those days. I mean, I think even today we struggle to talk about death and consider all those elements.
Absolutely, and I think that's really important because Dying Matters Awareness Week completes this Sunday, and Dying Matters was first established in 2009 as a coalition of charities and organisations that deal with hospice care, and people like Sue Ryder and Marie Curie and Hospice UK and other organisations all wanting to create an open conversation about death, dying and bereavement so that we in society can help to deal with that in a better way, a better understanding.
That's fantastic. We're going to come back to the Dying Awareness Week and find out about how other people can get involved and take something from what they put out there. But what about your own story? Where does that start?
Well, at the age of 11, I wanted to be a doctor.
You were sure?
I was sure. That's what I was going to do. And so at 18, I went off to university in Leeds, and Yorkshire held me. And I've stayed in Yorkshire ever since.
That's fantastic. And so you completed your studies, and being a doctor, studying to be a doctor takes immense dedication and drive because it's a long journey.
Yes. Yeah. 5 years, and long hours of studying.
And then practical work as well?
Practical work, yes. We would, at Leeds at the time, in the third year we started seeing patients, and it was lovely. It was really nice.
Really. Did you ever have an experience during your studies that convinced you were on the right path or not on the right path?
I liked the whole course, and there was lots that I could see about it, and so that's why I wanted to be a GP. But whilst I was in one medical attachment, I remember one patient coming in who clearly had a diagnosis of stomach cancer. And during that short time, he was admitted to the hospital and died in the hospital. And I was saddened, but also quite shocked at how he died in hospital, and thought there must be a better way of dealing with this. And I wanted to learn more about that. And we'd only had a very short time of palliative medicine. So I think we had just had 2 days. This is back in 1984.
Wow, it's such a big thing. We know we're going to die, but they only covered palliative medicine.
Well, that was back in 1984. It's a different kettle of fish now, because the medical students come to us for much longer at the hospice. So I chose to spend part of my self-directed study in the summer, because we had about 8 to 10 weeks where we could decide what we wanted to do, and I spent half of that at St Gemma's Hospice.
Oh wow! And what did that have a big impact on you?
Yes, it did. I was there. I spent time as an auxiliary nurse, working on the ward with the nurses. I went out with the social worker nun who took me on visits, so I was there doing bereavement calls and things like that. I also went out with the doctor on home assessments, and I spent some time working in the day hospice, and all that just captivated me. And I have to say that while I was there, I also did the nursing care of the dying diploma, which I have to say is my first qualification as a healthcare professional. It was a nursing one. So
Well, seems like you followed in Cicely's
no,
footsteps
I
more
wouldn't-
than you think.
no, nowhere near like that. But
You studied medicine for a long time thereafter. What made you finally migrate from general practice medicine to hospice?
well, it was while I was working as a GP, I had a period of depression, and I stepped back and thought, well, maybe I need to do something different. So I worked. I picked up some roles as a commissioner in the PCT, looking at cancer and palliative care commissioning, and working with helping practices to improve the quality of their palliative care. But that didn't hold me well enough, and it was really moving into a hospice that helped, and somebody encouraged me to apply for the job at Manorlands. And it was through her encouraging me I started, and it felt like I'd suddenly come home.
So tell me more about Manorlands.
Well, at Manorlands, it felt like I'd found my new family. It's a house which was gifted to the Sue Ryder Foundation a number of years ago, and has been developed to provide the hospice care. There's an inpatient unit, there's a day therapy centre, and there is a community team with specialist nurses, and there are doctors that work there. We have medical students, we have trainee GPs coming to learn. There are a range of nurses, there are physios, occupational therapists, social workers, counsellors, the chaplain, a whole sort of family and social care.
It's completely holistic care.
Absolutely holistic care, yeah. And you've got a load of volunteers as well who come and provide the tea trolley, although things are different now because of the time of COVID. But when I was there until 2018, when I retired, it was just a whole wealth of amazing people. And of course you've got a whole fundraising team, because you need it, because fundraising was fundamental to the success of the hospice movement. And Cicely Saunders had to raise millions to get the St Christopher's open, way back in 1967, I think it was.
Wow. What age does Manorlands care for? What age patients?
Adults.
Okay.
So from about 1920 to, I think our oldest, when I was there, was 104.
Wow. Children that are younger?
They're within the Yorkshire region. It's Martin House Hospice that provides care and support for children, and I've been on training events there. And one of the things that's key about hospice and palliative care is about education, educating doctors and nurses to provide the quality of care, but also about education for the community.
Very important.
Yes, and also research, working out what's trying to improve practice, continually trying to improve practice and make sure things are right.
Oh, that's fantastic. Has your Christian faith ever impacted your work, or been impacted by your work?
Yes, it has, because before I went to university, I was thinking at one point that I wanted to be a medical missionary, because the books I was reading. And then when I was at university, I was part of the ANMESOC and the Christian Medical Fellowship, and went to a cell group, which was a house group, and met some inspirational people there. At one point when I was a GP, I remember speaking to a vicar saying, I was just wondering about whether to train for the ministry. And he said to me, I think you'd be better as a doctor, because you'll reach more people. Wow. And he was right, because when I went to Manorlands, I felt I could blend my spiritual side and my medical side in providing care and understanding and compassionate care to the people that I met.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you've spoken to me before about going on a Christian weekend away, or going on, what was that about?
Well, this was a conference. This was while I was a GP. And encouraged by another parishioner, I went on a Christian Healing Conference, and somebody mentioned this, and I thought, well, out of a sense of curiosity, I wanted to go and find out more about it. And then they started talking about evangelism. Now, I've never expressed a desire to be an evangelist, because that's not the way I operate. It makes me feel uncomfortable. But then when somebody said, well, what's the word in the middle of evangelism? Well, it's angel. And what do angels do when they meet somebody in the Bible? They always say, fear not.
They do.
They do. And what do we as healthcare professionals do? We explore, we explain, we try to understand what's troubling somebody, and then we try and help. And by that, we then reduce their fear. And so we are then being angels. And when I was working at Manorlands, people kept saying, but you're all like angels to us.
Oh,
but, you know, that's just... So, you know, it's, for me, my faith is about being of service and delivering compassion and care.
There are very different ways of evangelism, and clearly that's what you're meant to be doing.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very, a good place probably to come back to Dying Matters Awareness Week.
Yeah.
Now, I myself have lost grandparents to cancer.
Yeah.
And very recently in January this year, I lost an aunt. She was a little bit further away because she was in South Africa.
Yeah.
But in all their cases, they passed away at home. They were very, hospice was very involved with all of them.
Yes.
And they were surrounded by loved ones, which I think is how it's meant to happen. How important is that? And if we come back to Dying Matters Awareness Week, I think that talks to the theme that they're focusing on this year.
Yes, that's right. And the theme for Dying Matters this week is, are you and your loved ones in a good place to die? Now, being in a good place is about understanding what's happening, whether you have an illness or whether you're just thinking a long way ahead. And so thinking about death does not bring it on. It's just about being prepared, understanding, and being able to share what you want, what's important to you. You know, it's not the bucket list. It's the what things need to be done. You know, whether it's writing a will, a power of attorney, working out what memories you want to share. And some of the fear that people have that I've spoken to in the hospice has been about a fear of missing out, or a fear of how are the family going to manage without me. And so part of that, understanding the fears, is about helping to dispel them and working a way around to address those.
Because it's so real, and yet it's something we're so scared about talking about.
Yeah.
How does the average person get involved? If you're in the earlier part of your life, maybe you haven't touched anybody who's passed away, how do you get involved, and how does something like the Dying Matters Awareness, how can it help?
Well, they have a website which has some amazing resources which help you to understand, to discuss things with people, to cope with bereavement and how to talk to somebody who's been bereaved. So a lot of the time, if somebody's been bereaved and nobody's really quite sure what to say, they'll walk round the other end of the side of the street. And people can sometimes feel avoided. But talking about a loved one, if you've lost somebody who's been loved, you're never worried about speaking their name.
No, you're not. And actually, you often need to be talking about that person because they've made such a mark on you. You can't forget about somebody. You don't get past it.
Yes. And one of the things that I have done is I share poetry with people. And sometimes poems have helped. And it's just finding the right poem. And I don't know how they happen, but they just seem to fall into my hands somehow. And I've shared that poetry, and it's spoken to people.
Oh, well, that's very real. Well, I know you've handed me something coming in here, knowing, and that already just means something to me, having lost an aunt just the other day, and not having been close enough to family to be able to do something about that. So.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we've got at Manorlands, and certainly when I was there back in 2018, they had telemedicine, so we were able to connect people. And at one point we were able to connect somebody with their relatives overseas.
Oh, wow.
And through FaceTime or WhatsApp.
It must mean so much to not just the person who's going through palliative care, but their family.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are left behind afterwards as well.
Yeah. And we've had photos sent that we've printed out to make sure that they've heard and things like that.
It's very special. Do you miss it?
Yes, I do. Because I miss working as part of the team, but now It was tiring, but it was very rewarding. But life circumstances changed, so I needed to stop. But now, working with church and some charities that I'm involved with, and the listening ear.
You haven't stopped.
Oh no, I've just changed. I've just changed what I'm doing.
Well, that's so inspirational, and I know that someone like Cicely Saunders has been a great inspiration to you, and I can tell you that you've been a great inspiration. Your story's been hugely inspirational to me, and I'm sure you have huge inspirational impact on many others in our community. So thank you so much for joining me today, for telling your story. I'm sure it's going to mean so much to others to hear it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone needs compassion, love that's never failing. Let mercy fall on me. Everyone needs forgiveness, the kindness of a Savior, the hope of nations. Truth is, you know what tomorrow brings. There's not a day ahead you have not seen. So little things be my life and bread. I want what you want, Lord, and nothing less. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. You are my strength and comfort. You are my steady hand. You are my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand. Your ways are always higher. Your plans are always good. There's not a place where I'll go you've not already stood. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in
Thank you, Pam and Caryn. I wonder who inspired you to follow the career path that you've chosen? Who's inspiring you to make the choices you are making? I'll leave you to reflect on those two questions. Our next shift will premiere on Sunday the 6th of June, but until then, may God go before you to prepare your path, walk beside you to give you guidance, and follow behind you to offer protection every step of the way. Amen.